program we're using, so please excuse any differences from the normal look. And if there's any challenges with sound or audio, please let us know in the chat. We are streaming here on Twitch and also on YouTube, so there might be some slight differences, but we will make sure to answer all questions and comments accordingly. So, everybody, we are back with a You're the Expert segment. I've been doing these sporadically. I'm sorry. But I figured, hey, now's a great time to bring on my friend, Aaron Trammell. Hello, Aaron, and welcome.
Hi, Mandy. It's good to see you.
You too. I appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us today.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. I love the work that you and Suzanne do, so it's really just cool to be here and to chat a little.
I appreciate. Oh, and there's the Mikhail, and I this is I'll show this one, Mandy on YouTube finally, and that's because we switched over to streaming on Twitch solely, and I was trying to figure out a way to do both without killing my computer. But I got a new computer, so a lot of people missed us on YouTube. So I'm glad that you could join us, Mikhail. It's been a while, and I'm glad you're able to pop in. So thank you. Yeah. So for those who are watching, I know it's a weird time of day for a lot of people. Um, let's learn a little bit more about Aaron and what we're going to talk about. So Aaron, please tell us about yourself a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm a professor at UC Irvine, University of California, Irvine, and I'm one of the folks here who teaches and researches games, which is a really, really cool thing. Uh, in addition to that, so I've written a few books on games. Two are out right now. One's called The Privilege of Play. It's a history of hobby games and race in the 20th century. Another one's called Repairing Play. It kind of picks up where Privilege of Play left off, and it dives deep into kind of like what it means to center Black people in a theory of play. And I have one coming out next year that's on Dungeons and Dragons and the cultures around Dungeons and Dragons I'm really excited about. So I do a lot of writing about the hobby game community, but I also do some work within it. I direct the Diana Jones Emerging Designer Program, which is a pathway for people from outside of the industry who don't have that much experience with hobby gaming to get into the industry. And I also work with Mandi doing consulting for Gen Con, trying to make it a more inclusive place. So I'm kind of involved in all ways with the hobby game industry, and I also co-founded and now and finally stepping down as editor-in-chief of a journal called Analog Game Studies, which
Okay.
was the first. Well, I shouldn't say the first, but definitely one of the most notable journals about tabletop and analog games.
Okay, that's great. And I don't know if anybody in the chat is familiar with that. If you are, please let us know if you're familiar with that. And did I know you were stepping down? Did
No, I might not have mentioned that.
Okay.
So technically, it's been this past year. We've been doing a transitional thing where I'm kind of on the way out, and Edmund Chang,
Yeah.
who's a associate professor at University of Ohio, is stepping up and stepping in. But yeah, I am stepping down from it. There's a lot of other things on my plate, and Edmund is doing a far better job than I ever did
Aw.
in that role. So I'm just really delighted and excited that he has the time and energy to help push the site forward.
Okay, no, that's wonderful. Okay, well, I know now, so that's good. I mean, you're doing a lot, so, you kinda have to have that work-life balance, as they say. So, this is really good, and, hi to those just joining the chat. I'm trying to say hi to everybody as well, so thanks for joining, and please, as, Aaron's talking, join the discussion, so put questions in the chat. I'll see them from both channels, and, we'll make sure to post them on the screen and ask, Aaron if, that works for you, Aaron,
Oh,
and
love it. I love it. Give me the questions. Nom, nom, nom.
that's good. So we'll get in the discussion, and then please feel free to do that. And Chelcat, thank you yesterday, the day before, for helping us with the stream. I did look into what you were asking about or mentioned with the static. It seemingly was just a Twitch thing. So there was something going on with Twitch because the audio is actually pretty clean. But when I looked back at the Twitch stream itself, the Twitch stream had a bit of that static, but everything else was fine on all the others. So thank you for bringing that to attention. We'll keep an eye on that. All right. Well, Aaron, so what are we talking about today? What do you want to focus on? And I'll keep an eye for those questions, and I may have some questions myself.
Yeah. So, as a professor of games, one of the top questions I get from friends and family is, "What is that? What is this thing that you're studying? What is game studies?" And
Yeah.
so, I thought it would be a great opportunity to kind of just talk to you about what game studies is. Often people are just interested in what it is and how to get involved with it, how to learn about it.
Right.
And so I thought I'd talk a little about that. And then I could even eventually get to the place where tabletop gaming has come into kind of change the direction of the field, which is where we're at today, which is a really exciting moment for everything. But things weren't always that way. So I'll tease, there's a little bit of a story. And for the folks on this channel, it's probably an exciting story. But I'll get us there. We got to talk through the boring digital stuff also.
No, it's good, it's good. And before you get to it, I see, of course, David, Eclectic Camel, has a non-serious question here, but I'm gonna ask just to get us, loose and ready. Um, would you rather fight one 100-pound duck or 100 1-pound ducks?
Uh, 100-pound duck. 100 pounds is a lot of pounds, but when you think about it, um, yeah, when you think about that, it's actually just kind of like a kid.
Okay.
So I think I'd rather fight a kid than 100 gremlins.
Okay, there you go. See? There you go, David. We've answered the question, that very serious question. Okay, Aaron, back over to you.
Yeah, and also like think of it's a good question. Also think about the ethical ramifications of hurting like one versus 100
That's
things.
I like the way that you turn that into, something for us to think about. So, that's true. It's like, when you think about those things, what's oh, great. I was gonna say something, but I'm not, because 'cause I'm like, "Wait." All of a sudden, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Then I started thinking about one versus the many. I'm all over the place. But that's really interesting how you've turned it now into something to think about, right? And that's actually a question we can propose to the chat while we're chatting amongst other things. What would you do? And then thinking about that, ramifications of just, you know, work challenge, the one challenge or the many challenge. So I'll leave it
Yeah.
there. All right. So let's talk. Okay, let's talk. Let's jump into, you had a story, analog studies. Tell us more.
Yeah, so yeah, I think there's two stories here.
Oh,
So
okay.
so one is the story about Analog Game Studies, which is the journal that I co-founded and I used to be the editor in chief in. And I think the other story is the story of game studies and game studies more broadly and what that is. And
Okay.
um, so for those of you sitting here, I thought I'd just kind of tell both. So I'm going to actually start with the older story, which is the story of game studies and what
Okay.
that is, and then bump it up to kind of analog game studies, where how we came onto the scene, what we were doing, why we were doing it, and then after that, then maybe we can just kind of bounce around some questions.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, the study of games is an old thing. People have been studying games since like the beginning of time. So it's hard to say like here's the point where like this field happened. But a few stars aligned in the late 20th century. So like computers and computing became really, really exciting, and a lot of English departments and literature departments got really interested in like understanding what hypertext was and like what hypertext did. And so there's like a lot of writing that's kind of really cool in the 80s and 90s talking about this new kind of virtual world that everybody was living in, filled
Hmm.
with hypertext and stuff like that. And so all of that kind of became part of the zeitgeist of what it meant to be talking about games. Because at this time, right, like a lot of games were text adventure games, and a lot of games were graphic adventure games. Some were shooters, like and stuff like that, and platformers. But a good deal of gaming on the computer really, really, really did work with text. And so there's a lot of scholars talking about the potential of games at this time to be like interactive theater, to create these like new narrative modes that we might imagine the world by.
Right.
And it was kind of a scene, and it was kind of interesting. At the same time, in Europe, there was a bunch of scholars who were really, really kind of interested in what a game was. Like formally, what is a game? What does a game do? What do we mean when we talk about games? And so they invented, or they went back in time, found this word for it. They called it ludology,
Okay.
the study of games. Um, and they kind of, at this early moment, generated something that most people in the field look back at today as like almost like the dark times of the field.
Right.
because they kind of manufactured this debate between the people who were interested in what a game is and how a game works,
Mhm.
and the people who were interested in how games and interactive systems constructed narratives. So there's a lot of writing that it was a debate, and I put this in scare quotes, and I'll tell you why in a second,
Okay.
between people who called themselves the ludologists and people that they called the narratologists, who looked
Right.
at narrative in games. Um, and in some ways, it was dark times. This debate was actually between a bunch of people who were generally men
Mhm.
who considered themselves ludologists, and a bunch of people who were generally women or feminists who consider
Sure.
themselves the narratologists. So there's like a gendered coding thing about it. Um, and there's also kind of a dismissive way that some of this writing around narratology um, was kind of characterized at this time. So there was some problems there.
Right.
But it was also kind of productive insofar as it led to the founding of a bunch of journals.
Mhm.
Um, uh, there had been early on Board Game Studies Journal. That one never really took off the same way that its counterpart a few years later, Game Studies, did. And so Game Studies, the journal got founded in, I think, 2003, 2001. And it wound up being kind of the center of these conversations around what is a game and how do we think about games. And there's a few other journals that did similar things around the time, like Eludamos was one, Game was one. They were often located in different nationalities or had a slightly different focus. Like this is the one that's about hypertext.
Right.
This is the one that's the Italian journal, etc. But it created kind of this thriving space of conversation and discourse where people were starting to look at video games and think about them, and they were starting to look at practices of play around video games and think of them. One of my favorite books from this early moment is by a scholar, Mia Consalvo. She's at Concordia University, and it's called Cheating. And it's just a
Okay.
deep dive into what cheating is and why it happens. And so, like,
I have a
isn't that
story about that.
interesting?
I have a story about cheating. Anyway, but
Yeah,
I'll let you finish what you're
yeah,
saying.
yeah. I want to hear it. So yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that happened at this early point in game studies. Um, so I when discussing this, I kind of try to think about waves, three general waves to kind of think through what happened with the field. So the first was just kind of this like coming together, almost artificial debate around narratology and ludology wave. It We're talking about things that are interactive on computers. How do we understand and define them? The second wave is kind of a social sciences wave.
Mhm.
This kind of came in response to a lot of, at least in the United States, litigation that was happening around games,
Oh,
where folks were, saying like games made children violent, almost like a post-Columbine reaction to
right.
games.
Are you talking about, video games specifically or all
Video
video
games,
games? Okay.
video games. So this is an important thing that happened. So I said there was this Journal of Board Game Studies, and this just did not really take off. It had a spotty publication history, and there weren't that many people outside of that small community reading it. Game Studies, the journal, on the other hand, became kind of like an international sensation and
Right.
the sort of space that a lot of different people were weighing in on games in a lot of different academic fields. And the notable thing here is that all of these conversations in game studies were happening around digital games.
Right.
Sometimes you'd get like Dungeons and Dragons or some tabletop
Sure.
game mentioned in an article,
Uh-huh.
but almost all of the essays were uniformly on video games at this time. And so it's this sort of social sciencey wave of conversations happens in response to this sort of like post-Columbine debate around games and violence, and do games make people violent?
Right.
Um, uh, and so that's kind of like the second moment of game studies, and that happens throughout the aughts into the beginning of the 2010s. And then I'd say the third wave is the critical wave, where people start to really interrogate games and player communities, and this happens in response to Gamergate, of course, um, where it's like, hey, well, the social sciencey wave was really, really focused on sort of exonerating games, but the critical wave kind of wanted to go back in there and say, well, actually, maybe something is happening with some of these player communities that we should be thinking about because it's troubling
Right.
in a lot of ways. And so things like queer game studies came out of the critical wave, which was a form of game studies that's focused around conversations about queerness and
Mhm.
identity. There's Black game studies has come out of that critical wave. And the journal that I co-founded, Analog Game Studies, was another one of them, asking the question, why aren't we talking about tabletop games
Yeah,
when they seem so important to this kind of conversation?
absolutely.
And so that's kind of the origin story of Analog Game Studies. And since then, and especially since actual play has become such like an amazing phenomena this past 5 years, suddenly there's been a lot more people interested in this question about what's happening in the tabletop world.
Right.
How do these tabletop games we're playing impact the lives we live, the classrooms that we build, and the ideas that we have, the stories we tell in games? And so it's kind of become this really, really happening and exciting space in game studies. We have Analog Game Studies as a journal that I co-founded and edit. We do a conference every year online. You can join us next month. It's called Generation Analog.
Mhm.
Just Google it, and you should be able to find a way to join. And just it's free
Right.
online. Anyone can join if they want to. There's the JARPS, the Japanese Analog Game Studies Journal, which is analog games from sort of like Japanese perspective, Japanese studies perspective. There's the International Journal of Role Playing. This is a whole journal. It precedes Analog Game Studies by like 5 years on just tabletop role playing games. So there's a lot of material kind of happening in the tabletop game space and a lot of conversations happening there. And it's just really exciting to be a scholar working there at the moment. Some of the earlier conversations that we've had have been around colonization in games. Like
Mm,
many folks in the audience probably know the conversations, the notorious conversations that have happened around games like Puerto Rico and Catan and stuff like that.
yeah.
So we've been kind of scholars bringing that scholarship that thinks about that and considers that, and trying to make that something that is supported also by literature, theory, and real world empirical data. So that's kind of what we do at Analog Game Studies, and that's also how we came to be within this sort of like larger field.
Okay, so it's pretty broad spectrum of things that you're looking at, which I think is good. And I think things that people can relate to or understand. You know what I mean? Whether they've been affected by it, they've seen it. When you talked about the cheating, this is I'm going to focus on this for a moment, if you don't mind, because
Yeah.
I'd love to know more about. And I don't know exactly what you're if it's like if it's the human condition in cheating in games, or if it's just I'm not 100% sure. So my quick story, and then I guess a question here, and please chat if you have a story or question in relation to this, please put it in the chat because I know it's not just me. I am the type of player, I don't really care if I win one way or another. If I cheat, it's usually by accident. Oh, shoot, I didn't realize I was supposed to do that. Anybody who's watched my solo streams will tell you I cheat all the time. Again, not on purpose. Um, I will leave the person nameless, but there are some people in the industry that I've worked with and, obviously play games with a lot of people. And there was a scenario where this really bothered me where there were people at the table that were unhappy because somebody at the table was obviously cheating and would question the rules and would be like, "Oh, no, you never told me that." Actually, no, I did tell you that. That's how it's played. And it was always somebody else's fault. And I guess this person was in a position I just didn't understand the need to cheat, I guess, and the fact that other people at the table expressly were suffering because of this cheating, and it was no longer fun. A lot of people can play games and not win, but that totally threw off the dynamic of the game. Now, this is just one example, of something that happened, and I think because of the position the person was in, I don't wanna give away too much here because I don't wanna, out someone specifically, it was surprising because this is someone who understands games well. This is like their profession, and you're playing with people who this is not really in their profession. We're just playing to have fun. And it was just they had to win. I don't know. So I don't know where that fits into the umbrella. And I don't know if anybody else has had any kind of situations with cheating, but it really made me sad. It actually made me a little upset. Um, because it was so blatant and it made other people not have fun. And when I play games, I want everybody to enjoy themselves. I gave up my spot for this person to play just so I wanted them to be included, and they kind of just poo-pooed all over it. I don't know, like, how do you explain these dynamics? And I know that's a really big question, but I don't know.
Yeah, so I'd love to dig in a few ways, and Mandy, I'm sorry, I don't know if the literature is going to completely support um, where you might be hoping I would take this.
No,
So
that's okay. But I want you to challenge it. If I did something
yeah,
like this is why I brought it up, because I would love to know.
So first, one of my superpowers is that I can kind of just quote song lyrics from the top of my head, and
Oh my
so
god,
the
I do that
Clash,
too.
which is one of my favorite song bands from my life, has a song on their UK release, the Clash, called "Cheat," and the lyric is "Cheat, cheat, no reason to be play fair. Cheat, cheat, you can't get anywhere. Cheat, cheat, or you can't win," and then music and stuff. But it's
This is oh my gosh, I mean, I know who the Clash are. I don't know a lot of their discography, but I'm stealing that. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the song is kind of about how when you're in this sort of uh, back against the wall position, sometimes the only recourse you have is the cheat. But that's political. Um, but so yeah, the Mia Consalvo book on cheating. Um, the, I love this. They had a chapter. One of the questions that she asks in the book, again, this is a video game. It's a book about video games. So she's thinking about single player games, which is a slightly different conversation, I think, than the question that you have, Mandy, which is about people at your table cheating, which
Yeah.
I have some thoughts on, and we'll
Sure,
weigh
sure. And
into that
please, like,
second.
take this, and while you're after, I do see some comments in the chat. So after you've had that, I'm gonna pull these comments afterward.
Yes, yes, please.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, so so in Mia's book, what she talks about is she talks about how uh, if you look through an archive of all of the Nintendo Power magazines from like when Nintendo was young in like the late 1980s, early 1990s,
Yeah,
you'll find that they had this sort of class. It was called classified information. It was a column in it that would give you cheat codes every week
I remember
about
that.
how to cheat in the video games that you just bought. Um, and so, and this was, if Nintendo owned Nintendo Power, it was their official publication, and it was teaching the players to cheat at the games. And the reason they did that was because people would buy these games. They'd often be like, $50. Like we talk about in video games getting more expensive today because the Switch 2 has, at least in the United States, a price point of $80 a
Yeah.
game for some of those games. This was $50 in like 1989 money, so this was probably more at the
Yeah.
time. So people would buy these expensive video games, and uh, if you bought like Battletoads and
Oh my
you
god,
played it,
that
you were
game was
not getting through that
it was so
spear
hard.
ramp
I hear
level.
you. Oh,
And so Nintendo Power recognized this, and the way that they kind of patched it, because this was a time before you could just roll out a game patch with your digital games, was they'd put in a column where you'd get the developer cheats to kind of get through these levels. That way, people who had the magazine could experience more of the product in the game.
right.
And so there's this level where, like, within the sort of history of digital games, single player games at least, cheating has always kind of been built into the know-how. Just like in tabletop games, I would say the closest parallel is house rules. Is that we've always
Yeah.
had house rules to the games, and what are they if not cheats that we all
Hmm.
agree on? What's the difference between a house rule and a cheat code, the Konami code in Contra that gives you 99 lives?
Right.
You could do that in a tabletop game and say we're just going to have 99 lives, as long as the table agrees on it. Now, then I would weigh in and I would say, like, it's not fun to play tabletop games with people who cheat. That's one of the
Sure.
reasons I think it's sometimes hard to play with very young children,
Yeah.
because when you're playing a game with a very young child, they're kind of in the imagination zone, and
Mhm.
that can be fun if you want to join them in the imagination zone. But it's definitely not a strategic experience.
Absolutely.
And I feel like when cheats come into games, it kind of undermines this idea of competition and strategy. And if that's why you're playing a game, that's going to be a bummer.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and that's valid. I never even thought about, like, I generally didn't use those magazines. My brothers did, although I'm not gonna lie to you, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Battletoads definitely forced my hand a little bit, okay? I'm not gonna lie there, everybody. But
I was a Michelangelo kid. He was the party
me
dude.
too, that was my favorite, but so we do have some comments I'm gonna share with you, and, feel free to comment if there's anything there, but I guess for me, I just don't understand I don't understand it, and this is where if anybody's neurospicy, so my word for neurodivergent, so ADHD, autistic, I know when you have ADHD, you have a very strong sense of, like, duty to adhere to, "These are the rules, you need to follow the rules." I have a hard time house ruling things. It's an ADHD thing. I don't know if anybody else feels this way as well. I find it very hard. So when people cheat, I actually take it personally. Even though I know it's not personal, it's something for them that they're doing. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But Mikhail says, and I'll show it here, I feel like cheaters in board games usually don't stay in the hobby for long, maybe because they can't earn money on it. What are your thoughts on that?
Damn.
I mean, there's
Well,
some.
I again, like, I want to be fair. So I don't know if I'm like I play some solo games. I love Mage Knight. It's one of my very
Oh,
favorite
nice.
solo games of all time.
Yeah.
Um, but I gotta admit, like, is it cheating if I miss a rule in Mage Knight? There's so many rules in that game. Every time I play, I feel like I miss a rule. Sometimes I'll do a run and I'll get a really high score, and I'll be like, I feel really good about that score, but I must have screwed something up.
Yeah, I've definitely been there. But see, I feel like you don't feel. Do you feel? I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't speak for you. Do you feel bad about it though? You're like, you chalk it up. It's a learning experience, and you move on.
I mean, I do, but I wonder, I want to give the cheaters the benefit of the doubt. Do they know they're cheating? Are they like, are they deranged, and are they just like, I'm out here to give everybody at the table a terrible time? Or is there something about the rules, something about how they understand the social space of the table, that they're
Yeah.
just not totally understanding the social practice that's at
Right,
stake
and
in
that
that?
actually ties into the whole neurospicy thing that I was telling you about, because there are some people who just may just not understand. Do you know what I mean? So, I'm not saying it's an excuse, but that's. But this actually falls into Chelcat's comment here. I've definitely played with people who blurred the lines between I wasn't paying attention to the rules and pretending I didn't know better.
That's me. So every time I teach a game to people, I forget a rule, and then everybody, it's like the running joke at our table is like, well, Aaron forgot that rule because it benefited him. And I'm just like, I just want everybody to have fun.
Right? That's it, at the end of the day, and there's always someone who goes, "Oh, you didn't say that," and it's like, "No, I'm pretty sure I did." Like, my memory's really bad, but there are certain things, like, I'm so thorough when teaching the rules, or I try to be, and as a teacher, right, like, you can understand this. You're judged at a different level now because 'cause you're a teacher, so you're expected to teach things a little differently, not to miss things. It happens, but now I'm so paranoid, then I'll have the rule book, even though I know the rules. I'll be like, "Well, you know what? Let me just make sure, because someone's gonna call you out and be like, 'Actually, you missed that.'"
And I'll go back to digital games for just a second.
Yeah,
There's
please.
two digital games that one that I will never cheat in, and one that I cheat in all the time. Um, and so the one I'll never cheat in is called Angband. It's a fork of the
Huh,
old game Rogue, which is like a ASCII dungeon crawl. I've been
okay.
playing it since I was like 10 years old. I love this game.
Right.
And there's permadeath in it, and so you can play a character for like 5 hours. They could be so cool. They could have like the File of Galadriel and like the Hobbit Sting sword, just like
I love it.
pimped out, sort of like Hobbit. Um, Running through this dungeon, and then you make a wrong turn and you basically just die, and it's
Ah,
permadeath, and so you should die. And so when I was a kid, I used to unplug the computer when I died, because it was like a really crude way to keep
sure.
the character that I loved online.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in my 20s, I turned a corner and I was like, I will never do this anymore.
Right,
And
right,
so
right.
I mourn the characters. I get sad when they die, and it's an important part of playing that game, is that sort of like permadeath and the attachment I have to the
Right.
characters.
So it's
Same in XCOM, which has similar permadeath rules. I love that. The other one is Slay the Spire, which I'm
yep.
totally addicted to. I play Slay the Spire on the computer all the time. And in Slay the Spire, if you're doing a run and you're in a fight, you can quit in the middle of the battle and then restart, and you'll start again at the start of the battle. And often I'll be
Oh.
playing Slay the Spire at like 2 a.m. in the morning. I'm kind of delirious. I'm just kind of pushing stuff around on the screen. And I'll just make a stupid mistake. Like,
Sure.
I really shouldn't have played this card. It was a misclick. And I will always just kind of redo. And then I'll try to do everything exactly the same. Um, but I've watched some streamers who do Slay the Spire, and they're like, the second you click that end run button and you save and quit and you come
Yeah.
back in, you are cheating. This is no
Really?
longer the sort of thing that we would consider like a professional run. So like, having to be mentally with it and
Right.
aware of what you're doing is actually part of the play of the game. So
Interest Yeah.
so like, bringing this back to the sort of academic
Yeah.
conversations, I think this is about, um, where we're looking at the cultural practice. Is it happening in the community? What is the community? If it's a community of one and it's between you and the Nintendo Power,
Mhm.
that's a different conversation about cheating than
Right.
when you're like a speedrunner who's trying to work with a speedrunning community, or if you're a board gamer sitting at a table with four of your best friends playing a game. Like, there's very different social consequences for playing games in these different uh, cultural environments.
And I'm glad you brought that up because the Jeremiah Blob has something here I'm gonna read about tournaments, and I don't play tournaments for many reasons. I find them very stressful. And then I guess my question for you is, like, is there like, what is that level of, and I don't know if morality is the right word, but, like, what is the level of, I guess, that morality of cheating? Like, what is defined as, like, for some groups or some people, that's not really cheating, and someone's like, "No, that's, like, a serious offense." That's like, where is that scale? Like, is there a happy medium, or like, "No, this is cheating, this is it, and anything outside of that, you're a cheater." Do you know what I mean? Like, now, I don't know, is there a scale on cheatiness?
I mean, I definitely so my very first research that I did in games was an ethnography, which is where you go into a community and you learn from the community by participating in it, of competitive Magic the Gathering players. So I'd
Oh,
go to
cool.
game stores every Friday night. I'd do Friday Night Magic and I'd play with them, and so I learned both, card drafting and competitive Magic.
Mhm.
Um, Doing this, and I learned it so much that I still do it to this day, but now for fun, not for
Yeah,
the reasons of uh, knowledge production
sure.
anymore. But I will say that, like, going into competitive Magic circumstances, because money is on the line, I think that's a big part of it. Is like the
Mhm.
second that you bring money or real gain or
Yes.
loss into the conversation, it becomes a different conversation around the rules of the game and what the rules are doing. Like
Oh,
if you went
valid.
to Vegas and you started cheating, you could get arrested.
Oh, 100%. Like, breaking laws now.
Yeah, because at that point, it's left this sort of space of the rules where the consequences are
Right.
illusory, and it's moved into the sort of like real consequences zone of what cheating is. Now, the interesting thing is, like, something like card counting in Vegas is cheating,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Right.
if you go in and you count cards, you're cheating. But why is that cheating? You're just actually really good at the game if you're card counting.
But so that to me is like, I see what you're saying, and I guess it's a skill, but then it's like an unfair advantage to everybody else who can't do it. And this is where I have to be careful, because just because you can't do something doesn't mean you shouldn't be allowed, you know what I mean? That shouldn't be held against the other person. But in this particular game, in this particular point, doesn't it, I don't want to say break the game. It's not what I mean. But there are lots of things in board games to prevent that. So that kind of indicates to me that it's morally not right.
But is this also morally not right? Right, like a casino knows that in the games of poker that they run, they're going to win like 51% of the time, and that
Right.
1% is their profit margin. Is that cheating? They're also playing the
Yeah.
games.
No, you're right. You're right. And that's a thing too, because now they're in it to, they don't want to lose money, right? They're there to make money and prevent people from running away with all their money. So they're going to find ways to prevent you from, running away with all of their money. So in effect, they're also cheating. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so this is one of the things that we did with analog game studies, is that we bring in this conversation in another field called cultural studies into the study of tabletop games. And so all these things that we're talking about cheating, the reason that I have so many thoughts about it
Yeah.
is in part because a lot of my training is in cultural studies, thinking about these sort of cultures of play that we have and how we play and how we negotiate and navigate this sort of idea of play that is uh, interesting.
No, absolutely, and this is a topic, like, I mean, we won't spend all of this talking about it, but there are a couple more comments here that I'd like to share with you, and then we can definitely talk about a different topic for sure. So, Jeremiah Blob has something about tournaments. It's a bit lengthier. I'm going to see if it shows up all in the stream here. I was in a tourney where there was a cheating player, but unlike most reasonable tournaments, the players didn't react appropriately, including myself, because we were rather unprepared for it. Incredulous even. Many of the players have been friends for a very long time, and we simply didn't have responses for it because it's not something we didn't do to each other. And here's our newer member who cheated, and no one reacted the way you're supposed to. So, for example, calling an adjudicator, etc.
Judge.
I don't play in tournaments, so I don't actually know how it's structured. I don't know if that's something you've done, Aaron, or
Yeah.
that's something you can comment on. But
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just rereading the question to make sure I get the answer right.
yeah, sorry, it was a slightly long one. My apologies. And here, I can put it up. I'll put this one a little
So
longer
I
so
get
people can see it.
so can I get a little more clarity, Jeremiah Blob? When you say people acted incredulously, did they not do anything? What was it that they did that was particularly incredulous?
Okay, so you know what? We'll leave that one, and then when Jeremiah has a chance to give us a bit more details, we'll come back to it because there are a
Yeah.
couple more things. Okay, nope, perfect. Chelkat's asking, can you cheat in a single player game, or are you just adjusting your play experience?
Yeah, so that's where I think that this is a really interesting topic of conversation that goes back to Mia Consalvo's book Cheating, wrote with the Nintendo Powers, where
Hmm.
your Nintendo was asking players to cheat um, in order
Right,
to adjust that experience. And I would say for me, I think this is a both, right? Like
okay,
I think that adjusting a play experience and cheating might have some overlap in terms of what they're doing. There's also that sort of question of authority and authorship kind of at stake there, which is like how much authority does a company or a designer have over the play experience, and how much authority and agency do players have over that
right,
experience? One of the things that I think is really exciting about tabletop games is that this is a venue where players have almost unlimited agency to structure their play experience how they like with house rules and stuff like that. Whereas that's something that you can't really do with a digital game unless you know how to get into the code and tinker around with it. So I think that's an amazing thing. But is
yeah.
it cheating? It might be. I don't know. The more we talk about it, the more I'm kind of on board with. Yeah, I think that's cheating, but maybe it's an all right kind of cheating.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And anybody who watches my solo streams, I am not a solo player. I literally do those streams so other people will be comfortable to try solo playing. I'm not very good at it, to be honest, and I cheat all the time. When I say cheat, I just oops, I missed a roll. Do you know what I mean? I was doing it on purpose, but I'm having a good experience in the end. So I
And
totally get that.
let me like, to that point, Mandy. Like,
Yeah,
I got a question for you. So when you're solo playing, this is like always the biggest bummer for me. You're at the end of the game. You're so close to winning. You're right there, and it comes down to a die roll,
yeah,
and it's you and your table and the die, and you roll the die, and you get it, and you just won the game. It's never as special to me as at a table with other people when I roll the die and everybody's there and we can all have that moment together. When I do it, I just feel like, all right, I'm packing
great.
up the game now.
Yeah, it's a little underwhelming. I'm more of a team person, or I like to play board games with people, video games by myself for the most part. Not always, but I do agree with you. It's just you miss out on that woo, you know?
Yeah,
Everybody's enjoying it.
there's something like I don't know, it's like in a narrative you have like the climax and the catharsis. And I feel like the dice do that in many tabletop game situations where it's a very climactic thing and feels a little anticlimactic sometimes at the ending of a solo game where I'm
I
just
would
like,
have to agree. That's
I
probably
don't
why I
get the
play them on
catharsis.
stream, because then I get
Yeah.
them. I get people in the chat like Chelcats, I know regular there are a few in our chat now, Jeremiah, who are regulars, and good job, Andy. Even if I lose horribly, do you know what I mean? It's nice to have that support. So I appreciate all of you, and that's kind of how I like to play it. We do have one last comment here from Mikhail here. I'll show this here. Just comparing to the chess community where there are lots of accusations and there can be big money there. So coming back to that discussion where money is part of it. I come from a chess playing family. They're very competitive. Did you take any look at games like chess or those types of games at all?
Um, I haven't in terms of research. So I don't research cheating. I
No,
research
right,
some dark play patterns. So things that would be kind of like ways that people play that we don't always like to talk about play.
right.
Like for example, I argue that torture is play in some of my work, which is a really dark space of play,
Interesting.
and not in a positive way. So
Right.
I'm very open minded about definitions of play that aren't necessarily like it feels good to play. Sometimes I think it feels bad to play. But like I think bullying is a kind of play, for example.
Sure.
Uh, but chess is kind of interesting. There's a concept in chess that a lot of one of my colleagues, Rainforest Scully Blaker,
Okay.
who's from Montreal for
Hey, Canadian.
Montreal folks out there. Um,
Canadian.
he's writing a book on exhaustion right now, and he,
Oh,
in his dissertation, he wrote about exhaustion also, and he's got this concept from chess that he pulls out in that book called the Zugzwang, which is a word that means that you put your opponent into a position in chess where every decision they make puts them in a worse off position than they were before.
okay.
Um, and he's really fascinated by this word because he feels like this is like what capitalism is doing to people today. Like
Oh,
we live in capitalism, and everything we do makes our lives worse, some way or other. And he relates this kind of this Zugzwang in chess. So it's some really kind of profound writing there
yeah,
on that. And so this is a way, I guess, a meta-analysis of chess to ask with it. Yes, it is a fair game, perhaps more fair for the white player
sure.
than the other players, but what isn't in this world? And uh, yeah, so in chess with the Zugzwang, like here's this game, and one player can be put into a no-win situation where everything basically gets worse. And
Right.
so, would it be wrong in life to cheat in that situation, um, or is it in games that we create this sort of like austere definition around them, where we really criticize the sort of practice of cheating? So I don't know. Like it'd be weird because a play that again the consequences are usually trivial,
Right.
um, and even with money coming into chess, that's creating a situation where it's non-trivial, but somehow it feels different than sort of like situation of saying like your social station will never change because of your lot in life right now.
Right. Right.
Is it appropriate to cheat in those circumstances? That's a larger philosophical question, I think.
Right. Absolutely. And actually there's Jeremiah has provided some insight to the previous comment, so I'll read that. And then I do want to touch on um that barrier to entry based on class, race, that sort of thing. I don't know how deep you want to get into that, but I definitely know behind the scenes planning conventions and events and trying to make opportunities for certain groups to be able to go to these conventions. Um, is something that I feel like we don't really talk about too much, and I know that in some of the books that you've done or some of your studies, you've talked a little bit about these things. So, let's read Jeremiah's comment, and then I wanted to jump into something a little deep, everybody. So hopefully you're ready for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So Jeremiah says, oh, hold on a second here. We noticed, but we didn't react in a public way. Some were silently angry. Some called out situations like myself and didn't bring up to a judge. It was because we didn't know to do that. And I feel the cheater not only used that to their advantage, this has more recognition impact points, but no significant reward. We learned from that and are more vocal now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really interesting culture around moderation in tournament settings that I'm just like endlessly fascinated by. And so like I think like part of what you're describing is what it means to be kind of like an outsider coming into a
Mm,
culture full of insiders, where there are these practices where you've got people yelling from judges, and the judges have this sort of authority to moderate things on the inside. But when you're an outsider, you don't know that, and you also don't really know if you should be comfortable asking a question of the judge, right?
right.
Like for many of us, there's a word when we move into our professional careers. There's that word imposter syndrome where you're like, "Am I
Yeah.
really the person who's here right now? Should it be about me?"
Been
And I
there.
feel that anytime I go into a sort of professional play space, I'm like, I don't know this game as well as half of the people here.
Sure.
Should I be able to do this? I will say I've got a friend I used to go to Magic the Gathering with every week, and she was a younger lady, and basically she was amazing at Magic, like mopped the floor with anybody who played against her. There was also this whole gendered thing that happened when we'd be in a tournament and we'd be playing a game. Often the people, if we were both sitting next to them, would look at us and they'd look at me for the rules, and then she would
Right.
answer the rules, and it would still be judge. And then of course she knew the rules better than most judges because she was that good at Magic. And
Right.
so there's these weird gendered things and other cultural things I think that happen in these tournament spaces also. That's sort of meta discourse around the play and the judging and stuff like that, and the proclivities of the people who join the games.
Okay. Absolutely. And Jeremiah said, and I'm sure I'm saying this incorrectly, Zugzwang, and Mikhail's saying it exists in real life and it's called bureaucracy. I mean, I work for the government, so I know all about bureaucracy. I don't know if that's something you're familiar with, but apparently Jeremiah has learned that from a Ristic Studies. Ristic Studies. So, okay, I learned a new word today. I had never heard this before.
It's a neat word. It's a useful term. It's like it's one of those German things like Schadenfreude, where you're like, oh yeah, now
Oh,
I've
yeah.
got a word for that terrible thing that
Exactly.
I've
Exactly.
always needed a word for.
I mean, we're in the learning profession, so learning is good, and that's something new for me. So thank you for sharing that. So yeah, so I wanted to jump into barriers of entry to gaming, and you can take this wherever you want to go, or what relates to maybe what you've studied,
Yeah.
and maybe the types of groups who may face that, or if you think things have changed. I don't know. I'm leaving it open for you, and anybody who has questions, comments, or anything, please put them in the chat.
Yeah, so there's so much here. So this
Yeah.
is a very, as I mentioned, like this sort of third wave of game studies, the stuff that
Hmm.
happens after Gamergate, the G word. I feel like sometimes like Voldemort is like, don't say that word.
Exactly. Don't say it.
It's gonna rile feathers, and hopefully the alligators aren't out there watching and listening and scheming. Um, but but basically, there's been a ton of research on this topic since Gamergate. So
Right.
I just want to give credit to a lot of other scholars that I would encourage people to look at the work of. Um, uh, Kishona Gray has written a book called Woke Gaming and Intersectional Technology that both look at Black communities of play. Bo Ruberg, who I work with at UCI, has written a whole book on queer game studies. They're one of the thought leaders in that field, and their work on queerness in games really goes deep on that. My colleague Amanda Cody at the University of Michigan State University, she's written a book called Gaming Feminism, I think it is. It is looking at all the different ways that sort of like macho communities online kind of bully women, and what it means to exist as a woman in those spaces.
Right.
And then all of my colleagues at Analog Game Studies, in one form or another, have contributed to this discourse at various times. My colleague Shelley Jones has written about a disability and ability in games.
Yeah.
Evan Turner has written a lot about different ways that different communities move into LARP and play like that. Edmund Chang writes also about queer game studies. We're about to put out a special issue on queer game studies that's specifically on
Fantastic.
tabletop games this month. So that's coming up very shortly at Analog Game Studies. Megan Condis also writes about toxic male communities in games. So there's toxic masculinity. So and that's just in Analog Game Studies. My friend Stephen Daschel writes about like Dungeons and Dragons and race. We were on Code Switch together 2 years ago, which was very cool. So, and this is just from the top of my head.
Yeah.
Like, if you asked me to make a list, I would be like, the list is 10 times longer.
Sure.
Hang tight. So that's just to say there's a lot of work being done on this problem and this question right now, and it's a really important and a serious one. One, I have a few thoughts on it. So
Okay.
in my work, I look at tabletop games specifically, and I look at how this has happened over time and through history. And so one of the things that I've noticed in my research is that a lot of communities that are communities of hobby players have sprung up in white play spaces.
Okay.
And although these communities often did become somewhat inclusive and bring other people of color or women into them, it was kind of an assimilationist paradigm. So, like, once you joined, kind of getting with the culture, understanding that these are the norms and the practices of the culture was important to these communities. So, it wasn't necessarily like the door is closed. It's like the door is closed unless you can kind of walk the walk and talk the talk, which anyone
Right.
can learn to do if they want to. Um, one very notorious story. There's this woman who lives in Los Angeles. Her name is Lee Gold, and she has written the longest running Dungeons and Dragons fanzine of all time. It's been publishing since like year one of Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s.
Wow.
And I just counted the amount of women publishing in this fanzine in the early days and compared it to some of the later days a few years on as part of my research. And the number just drops incredibly, where it goes from like half and half in the very earliest issues
Wow.
to like you'd have like 30 articles and 2 women writing.
Right.
And I think that the reason that this happened was because they had kind of this sort of like laissez-faire attitude to publishing and moderation. It was a fan community, so they wanted to get participation. They wanted to bring people in. And to do that, they were just like, yeah, send us our articles and we'll publish it. So that meant that they published articles that were like, okay, well, here's how you will have sex with somebody in Dungeons and Dragons with a dice roll. That's maybe not consensual. That's kind of questionable when that happens, right? Or here's how we're going to stat out women in this game, and maybe it's going to be different than the way we stat out men. And so they published all these articles that had these like small microaggressions in them. I don't think any of these articles on their own would be so offensive that you'd probably look at it and be like, I never want to play this game.
Sure.
But you might look at it and say, I don't really want to publish in this magazine. I don't know if I fit in this magazine, this fanzine, if I keep on seeing this stuff come up over and over again. And so that's kind of been the way the hobby community has, I think, managed its sort of gatekeeping for decades, was through these sort of like microaggressions and stuff like that were happening to people who didn't quite fit into the play space. And I do think things have gotten better in recent years. I definitely think that the last 5-10 years, thanks in part to some of the work of you, Mandi, and Suzanne, I think that these are things that there have been people who have made very deliberate interventions in this area to say like, hey, gaming can be a more inclusive space. You see all different kinds of people represented in gaming, and that makes a difference for a lot of people. What I will also say is that academically, some people argue that people of color have been in games all along, women have been playing games all along, and I agree with that.
Sure.
A lot of my research, I want to focus on the problems, so I don't always look at the fact that folks have been there all along. That is true, but I will say that it has always been disproportionate. It has always been a lot more white than it has been colorful, at least in North America. And it's also been a lot more male than it's been women in North America. And I think that those sort of structural things have impacted the cultures of play within them. The last fun fact I'll throw out here, there's two, two fun facts. One is back in the day in the 70s, because I asked Lee about feminism when I interviewed her, and I was like, hey, do you consider yourself a feminist? And she was like, oh, no. So that was like something that she was not interested in engaging with. And I respect that. I think there's lots of reasons that people might want to identify or not identify different ways. But in the fanzines in the 70s, when she's talking to these guys saying really trashy, toxic stuff, she's calling them male chauvinist pigs all the time. So it was just kind of a different language back then about how people would activate one another and how they would encounter parts of the community that they disagreed with. So maybe the term chauvinist pig has to come back. I don't know. It's a throwback. The other thing was this guy, I think it was Bill Smith. It was like the most generic name, and he was one of the few black folk playing games in the 70s and 80s, playing Dungeons and Dragons and other war games at the time. I asked him what it was like to be one of the few black folks playing games, and he also even edited the rules for Avalon Hill, which in my opinion has this sort of sordid history of white supremacy. And he said that first Avalon Hill didn't even know he was black because he only spoke to them on the phone. And he's from the Midwest, so he didn't have a sort of urban affect, so they never suspected anything. And then he said, at cons there were often Nazis playing with them at like the same table, like the sort of guys who like want to play Rommel or Hitler or Germany and like Axis and Allies. And he was like, but they were so dumb, we just beat them every time. So So some things never change, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I know this is a topic it's hard for some people to discuss. I get that, or openly discuss, because online sometimes people want to talk about it, and there's always a small group that wants to make it challenging for people to have these kinds of discussions. A question that I like, we're nearing the end of this, but I've been seeing this online, and I want your thoughts on it. I don't know if you've heard of fatigue, and you can put a word in front of that, whether it's, 2S LGBTQ2IA plus fatigue, black fatigue, whatever. This is, and when I say whatever, I don't mean that in a, I don't care way, as in like any of the things that we're trying to make better that are challenging us right now. There are certain subsets are like, there's a fatigue of this, a fatigue of that. Do you think that's a real thing? Do you think we're actually changing things? And I'm specifically talking about board games. I know that's a huge, huge can of worms I'm opening there, but I'm specifically talking about board games. So do you think there's this fatigue that actually exists? And then on top of that, are we actually moving forward and doing things to make it better?
That's a great question. I have a lot of thoughts on it. So
Sure.
first, I'm just going to think about my dad.
Yeah.
I'm mixed race. My dad is black. And one thing that's important for him is showing white people that he is chill and safe and a normal person to be around. So it's a
Right.
very antiquated perspective on race in some ways, but in other ways, I just think that those small acts where because he grew up in sort of like a lot of white spaces, and
Sure.
he had to work in a lot of white spaces when he was younger. And so I think that, if you are a person of color, if you are a woman playing games, I think honestly, just participating, just being there makes a huge difference. Um, I think in some ways that makes a bigger difference than posting and screaming about stuff online, which is the second thing I want to talk about, which is that you kind of for mental health reasons, I've been
Sure.
not on as social media as much as I have in prior years, because I feel like all of social media is sort of like emotional. It's it's like an emotional monster that we've
It is.
created,
Oh my gosh.
where it's whenever anything happens, there are lots of feelings and perspectives on it, and like as a person, I am not sure that I have the cognitive tools to process mass emotions on the scale that social media
Sure.
allows me to experience them. And so this past 9 months, I've kind of experimented with being mostly off of social media,
Hmm.
and I got to say, it has done wonders for my mental health. And I definitely think that, and I wonder if when we start talking about like black fatigue or LGBTQ plus fatigue,
Right.
if it's actually social media fatigue that we
Right.
are misdiagnosing as the sort of cause that's there,
Right.
that we're seeing a lot of discourse around at the time. And I think that that's an important thing, right? Because the fatigue, like I've never ever gone to like um, uh, an activist event or a protest and felt fatigued afterwards. I usually feel energized from those
Right.
things. It's actually just reading about this and this person's feeling and this person's feeling, that produces that kind of fatigue for me. And so more and more, I'm starting to wonder if this specific digital tool is fatiguing,
Okay. I
if it's
understand.
asking more of our bodies than our
Right.
bodies have ever been produced to make
Right.
in history.
Right. Absolutely. And for those who maybe are not sure what I'm talking about, on a lot of social media, there have been people, certain groups who feel like, oh, they're tired of hearing about XYZ group. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's all I hear about now, okay, let's move on. And that's the reason why I asked the question, as in, like, do we feel fatigued from, talking about these, challenges or groups? And the second part was, are we actually moving forward? Are we actually making changes and doing things that are helping the community? I'm specifically talking about the board game community. And and this is not a topic I expected a lot of people to comment on, because I know it makes you targetable when you put comments here. But please, if there's anything you want to share, happy to hear that. So, oh my goodness, look at that. Like, I feel like an hour goes by so
I
fast.
cannot believe that this has been an
We'll have to
hour.
do we'll have to do a part 2, because I feel like I had so many more questions to ask you. And we just, like, scratched the surface a bit, but I know there are some people that are still watching, and, yeah, so, I'd love to hear your feedback or comments, like, is this something you'd like to hear about more? We're gonna be doing more of these, segments, whether it be via the podcast, like in shorter segments, or these full videos with me or me and Suzanne, depending on who's available. Aaron has kindly shared this information about this segment to colleagues, friends, and we'll see some of their perspectives as well on different topics. So please let us know in the chat here, or at you can email me at saltandsassgames@gmail.com to let us know if there's a topic you want to hear about, or if these segments are interesting to you. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So, Aaron, thank you so much. I mean, I always have a pleasure. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, and I'm always learning things as we have these conversations. But I'm gonna spotlight you for this. Is there a place where people can find your work? You can also feel free to type some stuff in the chat. I can also put it afterward in the video. But yeah, maybe letting us know about like where we can find you, more where we can find more of your stuff.
Yeah, so I try to put all of my writing on my website, which is aarontrammell.com, and I just try to put links to it. I think, speaking of cheating, I think some of the people who've published things might not be so happy about that,
Fair.
but you can read most of my essays on aarontrammell.com. My books, you have to buy The Privilege of Play. That one you can buy on Amazon. It's like $30. The other one, Repairing Play, is a little shorter, and you can download that for free online on NYU's website, not NYU's, MIT's website. Just Google Repairing Play, and they have a whole open access, and you can just download that. Yeah, and then I'll just plug Analog Game Studies. That's the site that I co-founded, and I used to be the editor-in-chief of. My little baby, and I think we've put a lot of good things in the world. We've been doing it for 11 years now. And we've got some new leadership, which is far more organized and effective than I am. So I encourage you to tune in there. We also accept submissions at Analog Game Studies from people in the community. We have a peer review model where we try to pair people up with an experienced editor and kind of work with them until a publication is ready. We want the site to be a place where we can build ties to the community. We used to be very deliberate about bringing in designers to talk. Cole Worley wrote an early essay for us at Analog Game
Oh,
Studies.
fantastic.
Jason Morningstar of Fiasco and a few other games, Bully Pulpit Games, wrote an early essay for us on character sheet design. So we've hosted a few folks from the industry also, and we love those essays because they're often the sort of conversations that academics don't engage with enough, and we want to promote that kind of community. So those are the places to find my work. And yeah, this is true to light. And yeah, Mandi, it's not only nice to speak with you, but I learn a lot every time I talk to you as well.
No, thank you so much. I love it. This is great discourse, and definitely we'll be back with a part two for sure, for everybody. And all of the information you have, I'll get you, Aaron, just to send me some of that info that you talked about today. Maybe some of those books you mentioned, links, just the info, and I'll link it in the final video on the channels, like as resources for people if they want to know a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll do that. I will remember to do that immediately after this so I don't forget.
It's okay, don't worry. It'll be up there, but I'll go in and update it for anybody else who's interested. So thank you again to Aaron Trammell for joining us. It's always a pleasure and delight. And to all of you for taking the time to listen and contribute. I appreciate you all so, so much. And let us know what you think about the new look. For this is solely just for interviews. Interviews. This is the program we're going to be using going forward, but for streams it'll be the usual. So let us know via email, or just hit me up on the socials to let us know. We'll be back next Friday, tentatively, talking about upgrading your board games using 3D printing. We're going in a completely different direction there, but we have other topics coming up for the You're the Expert segment. So yeah.
I've been playing Arkham Horror Living card game with one of my closest friends down the street, and he's got a 3D printer, and I swear it has like opened the hobby up for him in a way I
Really?
never expected. He's like coming over, he's like, I got these new player things I made, these organizers. It's so cool.
I hear, like, my friend who was helping me test the stream yesterday, like, he's like, he has, like, 6 printers or something. I'm like, "I have 0." But, like, we're playing Elder Scrolls, and I think we were talking about this, and he 3D printed, like, the player mats where you have to put, like,
Yeah.
your dice and stuff. He 3D printed something for that to make it, like, a bit more structured. I'm like, "Oh my goodness." Like, it's wild what you can do with 3D printers now.
Yeah. It's really amazing.
Yeah. So if that interests you, everybody, that'll be like a bit of what to get started if you're looking for a machine, what machines you might want to be interested in looking at, and maybe how to upgrade your games. Or I have no idea. I'm talking about stuff I know nothing about. So if you're a beginner and you're interested in 3D printing, or if you're not a beginner and just interested in 3D printing, next week's You're the Expert will be the session for you to attend. So stay tuned for that. Well, there you go. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. And oh, there's some comments. Sorry, I missed that here. Um, thanks, Michaela. I'm so glad. A very interesting subject. Thanks, Aaron and Mandy. And a lot of people in the chat are people that are follow religiously and are always in my comments, which I appreciate so much. They are regulars, so I appreciate you. Chelcat, this has been really interesting. Thank you. Oh, Tulsa, I didn't. Gosh, Tulsa, I haven't seen you in a minute. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining. Found that very interesting. And Mikhail saying it's been great to catch you live on YouTube again, and I hope there will be more. Yes, there will definitely be more. I was just trying to find a good way to do it. So yes, you will see my face and other faces of the channel there. And oh, Aaron, a heart. Thank you so much. Haha, I love that. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And again, thanks to Aaron. And yeah, you'll see us back on the channel soon. And the podcast episode drops next week. So hopefully you'll catch that as well. All right. So, Aaron, stick around for a little bit. Everybody else, have a wonderful rest of your night. Have a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you soon. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you.